Hey everyone, this is Jay Stein, and this is the Intelligent Investor Chart of the Week series on the Everywhere YouTube channel, where each week we look at your favorite dynasty assets and talk about whether we think they're buy, sell, or holds. And this week we're going to look at Kenneth Walker III, or Ken Walker, and why I think he is still a sell in dynasty fantasy football, although he's actually getting closer to maybe being upgraded to a hold at this point. Let's get to work. Yeah, so hey again, thank you so much for joining. My process is about looking at KTC versus fantasy points per game in a series called the Intelligent Investor. And what I do in the Chart of the Week series here is we look at the KTC charts of these players past and try and determine what that will tell us for their future KTC prices going forward. And of course, KTC is KeepTradeCut. KeepTradeCut.com is a website where they use crowdsourcing. People go and visit the site and they're given 3 players and they decide whether they want to keep, trade, or cut those players. Then they put it into a fancy algorithm and come up with values for each one of those players. And it's basically a sentiment indicator market. And what I try and do is use it like you'd see stocks on a stock exchange. So the KTC would be my dollars that I'm trying to do for each player's share. So let's take a look at Kenneth Walker's chart here from a KTC perspective. So this is his KTC chart. The blue line, that blue solid line, that is Kenneth Walker's a KTC over time. And it starts on April 27th, 2022 at around 48.64 KTC. And this chart goes all the way to March 7th, so a few days ago here at 5,706 KTC. His max, actually, where he sort of peaked out on KTC, that was on November 8th, 2022. Pay attention to that date, November 8th at 6780. So the red dashed line that goes through the center, that is the average KTC. So if you take the average KTC of that blue line over time, that's where that red line is. That is around 53 KTC. The blue dashed lines, those are plus or minus 1 standard deviation of the series. So anytime that dark blue line gets up close to the dashed line or breaks through the dash line, what you'd be expecting at that point is hoping that thinking that that dark blue line would move back down towards the average, especially as we cross through those dashed lines. And so this is what his chart looks like. The purple band, that is the fantasy football season. So that is week 1 through week 18 of the regular season, not including the NFL playoffs. And clearly the white areas are sort of the off season here. So Kenneth Walker, right? So I've actually had Ken Walker as a sell in my work, and back in this is sort of a big win for me. So I'm gonna tout what I said here. So back on November 9th, this was when it was published in the Intelligent Investor Series, Volume 11 on Dynasty Nerds. So I moved Walker to a sell. I downgraded him to a sell at that day. And his KTC at that point was 6780. Remember, the peak was November 8th, and this was published on November 9th. And so his KTC at that time was, I exactly got the peak in what his KTC was on to the day on that. And at that point, I said he had 20% downside, and I put a target price of him of 51.50. Since that time, Kenneth Walker's off 17% to from the 67.80 to the 56.61, which we're at ish right now. So I regard this as sort of that a pretty big win. And actually, I'll actually read what I wrote at that time. I said, guys, what are we doing here? We pushed Kenneth Walker III up to running back 1 in KTC. Don't get me wrong, KW3 is probably good, but Dynasty RB1, probably not. My advice was sell Kenneth Walker. I'd sell him straight up for JT, Breece Hall, or a few other running backs on the list. I had a few other running backs and players in a list that I put in there. And I'd also be interested in selling Kenneth Walker III for a first plus a running back or wide receiver in the 4,000s KTC range, which is interesting because right now I'm kind of arguing for a similar trade, except instead of a first, I'm asking for kind of like a second range area. So what is the valuation? What is the downside from here, right? So honestly, there's not as much downside. If you go by my price target from last November, which was that 51.50, there's probably 8 or 9% downside left to go, which I think even still holds when you're looking at it from a valuation perspective for my work that I do. If you go by this chart, you can see the dark blue line moving back down to the red dash line, the average line, which is around 53.50 would be that average KTC. And if that's the case, there's another 5% downside. But in large regards, the move has already happened. The big move, the easy money, that's now out of the stock, and we're actually getting closer and closer to a point where I might actually upgrade. So if he gets in that 53 to 5400 range, that's when I upgrade and we move from a sell to a hold. So while he's still categorized as a sell, I am actively still trying to sell the player. But once he moves to the hold, then I think he's about fairly valued and the valuation is about right. So we're getting really close to that level. I think you can go one way or the other. If you get another 4%, continue down on this trend 4 or 5%, then he'll probably move in my work to that hold rating. But right now, I'm thinking about mostly about selling and making good on Kenneth Walker right now. So back in November, the trade that I recommend doing was to sell Kenneth Walker III straight up for AJ Brown. That was my big trade. That at that time on KTC, that was a fair trade. And now AJ Brown is about 760 KTC points higher than Kenneth Walker III, even though Kenneth Walker III is still RB3 on KTC. So, something that you definitely could have worked out really if you took that advice at that time. Throughout this series, on this Chart of the Week series, I've made a couple of Kenneth Walker recommendations as well. So for the Godwin video, I said sell Kenneth Walker III for Godwin plus an early second. And I'd still do something like that if I had the opportunity. Again, that actually favors the Godwin side now from a KTC perspective. So the trade recommendation when I gave it is actually moved it a little bit in my favor already. But still be looking to do that. The other one, Kyler Murray. I'm really interested in buying Kyler Murray right now. So I'd want to sell Kenneth Walker III straight up for Kyler Murray. At that time, that was something that would work. That'd be something that I would still be very interested in doing, getting myself what I think is a extremely productive QB that fairly young too as well, that can be very valuable in Superflex formats. The one that I'd say right now that I'd be trying to do from a compounding perspective, again, compounding is trading down the price curve to a running back that maybe scores similar points, but actually collecting the plus more, collecting the draft picks on top of that, and then doing more with those draft picks. So what I would recommend is you could do Kenneth Walker III into a DeAndre Swift or a Ramondre Stevenson, and then collect that second on top of that, 2023 second on top of that. All trades that would work out on KTC, but that's sort of what I'd be looking in terms of actively selling Kenneth Walker III. Now, remember, we're getting very close to the point where Kenneth Walker gets moved from that sell to the hold area. And at that point, then I'm not trying to actively move him. So we're getting within, 500 or less KTC points away from where I would want to be. Actually less than that. And so 5% for sure of KTC of where I want to be before I move from a sell to a hold. So just all things to think about. But right now, actively selling Kenneth Walker III, been one of the better, more productive trades that I've made. And that one was in November of 2022. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know who you want to see next week in this series. And please like, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're not already, please join up on the WRL Patreon. You can find me on Twitter @_Jason Stein. And the Intelligent Investor series, actually, we're going to be publishing that at the end of March here, and look for what happens to Kenneth Walker at that point. He might at that point be a hold in my work where I upgraded him and sort of lock in that performance that we've seen so far. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching, and see you again next week.